Hi, I'm Josh, and I'm so grateful that you've decided to spend some of your very valuable time with me as I talk about the board games I played in January of 2022, which happens to cover quite a range of games from really great to very middling to absolutely atrocious. So let's get into the games. Just before we dive into the games here, I do have to apologize to you once again for a complete lack of uploads over the past couple of months. I am 11 months into the legal separation and divorce process, and I've really been at the end of my rope, mentally speaking. And so I just haven't had that emotional energy to put into the hobbies and the things that would normally bring me pleasure. So I don't know how much longer this is going to go on. I hope it's not too much longer. I'm going to try to do better moving forward in terms of getting things uploaded on as close to a weekly basis as I can, but I hope you'll bear with me as I continue to struggle through this. But enough of that. You don't want to hear about that. Let's talk about board games. Now, the first time I got together with a friend in January to play a few two-player games, we ended up getting 3 games played. The first one was a game that has been a grail of mine for quite some time. I've been really trying to get hold of this hard-to-find game. It's a game called Verona Twist. This is a game that's designed by Dorsongsi Joseph, and the reason why I was trying to get hold of it for such a long time was because I could see that it has some similarities to one of my all-time favorite game series of all time, which is the Mr. Jack series of games. So I finally got a copy thanks to the kindness of somebody in the US who was able to grab a copy for me and ship it up to Canada, and I got to try it out with my friend. Now, we played a couple of games, switching sides in the game. One person is trying to discover the secret identity of the other player, who has a bunch of characters that they're trying to move around a map and try to keep their identities hidden. After just a couple of plays, I've rated the game for now a 5 out of 10. The reason why it's just a completely middle of the road rating is because I'm not sure what to think of it from a tactical and strategic standpoint. From my first couple of plays, it really felt very random. It didn't feel like there was a lot from either side of this two-player game where you could really play very tactically. And I don't know if that's just inexperience, the fact that I've only played a couple of times. I would like to play some more to see if there is some more meat in there, some more hidden kind of strategy that we're just not getting at initially. I don't know if that's the case or if it is just a very random game. Unfortunately, I think both my friend and I didn't really think highly enough of the game to really spend much more time exploring it. So maybe I'll try it with one of my kids at some point. But for now, Verona Twist is kind of a disappointing 5 out of 10. The second game we played that day was a little card game called Arboretum, where you have a hand of cards that you're playing out to the table in your own little tableau, and you're creating this group of trees on the table and trying to play them in such a way that you'll score as many points at the end of the game as possible. Now, throughout the game, you're drawing and discarding cards so that you have a constant, I think it's 7 cards in your hand, as well as the cards you've played to the table. And the cards you keep back in your hand are going to determine how the cards you've played on the table are scored. So you want to keep back some big point cards so that you are the player who is able to score that type of tree, whereas your opponent is also playing the same types of trees, and they're also maybe keeping some cards back to try to have a higher value of cards in their hand so that they are the ones who can score that type of tree instead of you. But in keeping back those cards in your hand, you're also not playing good cards onto the table that could score you more points when it comes to the scoring. So there's this really interesting push and pull of trying to get as many points to the table as possible while at the same time trying to keep cards in your hand so that you can actually score the cards that you've played to the table. And I really fell in love with this game. I thought it was so clever. I rated it 8 out of 10, and it was the type of game that immediately had me wanting to come back for more. And as you'll see as I go through this video, we did actually come back to it again. So that was Arboretum, and the third and final game we played that day was a game by Bruno Catala and Bruno Faiduti called Raptor, which is a fairly simple little two-player, asymmetrical, quick-playing, highly tactical game where one player plays as a group of raptors, where there's one mother raptor and 5 little babies, and that player is trying to get their babies to escape off the board, while the scientist player is trying to tranquilize the babies and then collect them to study them, all while trying not to get eaten by Mummy Raptor in the meantime. All of the gameplay is based around a really clever card play system where each player every turn simultaneously chooses a card to play and then reveals them at the same time, and every card has an action point number as well as symbology representing a specific action, and players compare the two cards that are played. Whoever played the lower number of the two gets to take the action that's represented on their card. Whoever played the higher number gets to use a number of action points equal to the difference between the two numbers when they are subtracted. That's how many action points they have to use to do various things on the board. So players are using these actions and these action points to move around the board and trying to accomplish the goal that they need to do to win. It's a very clever and very fun game that I rate 7 out of 10, and even that feels slightly generous, because the one major problem I have with the game is that it is heavily balanced in favor of the scientist player. It is so hard to win as the Raptors, and were it not for that imbalance in the difficulty level, I could see myself rating this game as high as an 8 or 8.5 perhaps. But the fact that it is so difficult to play as the Raptors makes it less likely to get to the table. Now, it is a good game to get out with my kids, where I can play as the Raptors against them as a scientist player, and that natural imbalance makes for a balanced play between my child and I. So in that respect, it kind of works out pretty nicely. But when you're playing against two sort of equally skilled adult opponents, you're going to see the scientist player winning most of the time. But it's otherwise a very cool game with very cool components and production quality. So the next time that friend and I got together for some two-player gaming, the first game we started out with was one of my all-time favorites, and that is a game called Clank, a deck-building adventure. We played one of the expansions, which was called Clank Expeditions, Temple of the Ape Lords. I think that's the newest expansion for Clank that's out there. I do have all the available expansions for this game because, like I said, it has been a favorite for quite some time. This is a game that I rate 9 out of 10, and I pretty much give all the expansions the same 9 out of 10 rating. It's a clever game that combines deck building with racing, with a push your luck aspect. Players are these adventurers who are kind of delving into these dungeons, trying to grab as much treasure as possible while staying alive, and then getting out of the dungeon in time in order to trigger the end game and perhaps try to trap your opponents in the dungeon and prevent them from escaping in time. So it's all based around a victory point system. You're trying to get the most points worth of loot, but you are trying to do it in as quick a manner as possible. All the really valuable stuff is way down deep in the dungeon, so you gotta, if you want the big points, spend the time to get all the way down to the bottom of the dungeon, but you gotta make sure you leave yourself enough time to get out before you die, or one of your opponents leaves and triggers the end of the game. Temple of the Ape Lords, as with all the other expansions, adds some interesting twists in that there are some movable passages or movable intersections on one side of the board, and then the other side of the board has kind of a set collection system where you're collecting different items and getting points based on how many of each item you've collected. After we finished playing Clank, I had asked my friend to bring Arboretum back again with him because I had enjoyed it so much the first time he had brought it, and we ended up playing 2 more games of Arboretum. Again, that's a game that I ended up rating 8 out of 10, and having played it a couple more times, I definitely stick by that rating. I still really quite enjoy the game. It really is a very good 2-player game. I could see it working fairly well with 3. I think it plays up to 4, and I just can't imagine playing 4 players. I think that 2 might be the best. 3 would probably be pretty decent still. Although, like I said, I've only played 2, so I'm not quite sure. That's just based on my experience with the game. Now, before I go on and talk about the last few games I played this month, I do want to take a second to let you know that the motivation to keep making videos in the midst of my mental health struggles is the fact that I'm receiving support from my Patreons. And I want to send out a special thank you to my higher tier Patreon supporters, Joanna, Paul, Mojo Dam, and Asmondas Perfect. Thanks for helping me to keep going in these difficult times. Thanks a million for your support. I appreciate it so much. Now back to the games. So the third and final time that my friend and I got together to do some two-player gaming in January, we only played one game, but what a game it is. And that is Spirit Island, designed by R. Eric Reyes. This is a purely cooperative game that is sort of like the anti-Settlers of Catan, in that players are playing the sort of natural spirits of an island that is being invaded by colonizers. So this nation has come over the sea in an attempt to settle and colonize these islands at the expense of the indigenous peoples who already live on the islands. And we, as the spirits of the islands, are doing our best to protect the islands, to protect the indigenous peoples, and to throw the invaders back into the sea, essentially. So the theme is pretty cool, and the gameplay is quite a handful. It is a bit of a complex game rules-wise, but a lot of the actual complexity of the game comes into play with trying to figure out how best to make your spirit's powers work to overcome these invaders. So each of the spirits that are in the game plays vastly different from each other. It's really quite amazing just how asymmetrical the powers and abilities of the spirits are, and how playing each spirit gives you a brand new game experience each time as you sort of work to figure out how to best use the spirit's abilities. My friend and I played this game and we got smoked. And at the end of that game, I was like, am I even getting all the rules right? Because I don't see how it's even possible to win this game. But we set it all up again and we played a second time, and that time we did pull off a win. So I was like, okay, I guess it's just a matter of learning how to play the spirits that we're using. I then went on to purchase the electronic version through Steam and downloaded it on my PC and started playing some solo games using just a single spirit. You can play multiple spirits at the same time, but there's so much to keep track of just playing one spirit. It's quite a brain-burning game just trying to manage one at a time. But I am proud to say that in one of my solo games, I did completely wipe out all of the invaders from the island, so that was kind of a fun accomplishment. Most of the time you can achieve specific victory conditions that don't involve eliminating every single invader, but in that instance I was able to do so. So Spirit Island is one of the best cooperative games I've ever played. I think next to Gloomhaven and the Pandemic Legacy series of games, I would say this is my favorite cooperative board game. I rated a nearly perfect 9 out of 10, and the other thing that's amazing about this game is its replayability. There is so much in this game to explore, especially since I have the expansion that is the Branch and Claw expansion, I believe it's called. And just the variety of the different spirits, like I mentioned. Plus, there are different scenario elements that you can add to the game and try playing with these different elements in play. And there are also these full sort of campaigns that are set up where you can play against a specific nation that has its own quirks and abilities. And I haven't even dove into any of these other aspects of the game because there's so much to explore just playing the game as it is. But I would say that Spirit Island is one of the most replayable board games out there, just for the sheer amount of content there is to explore, especially when you do get the expansion and promo content. So this is just an absolutely amazing game that I was quite excited to get to the table again. Now, next up in January, I did some two-player gaming with my older son, and we played Star Realms, which is an old deck-building card game where we have two players who are fighting with each other in this space battle and trying to get their opponent down to 0 life, or whatever they call the life points there. And it's a deck-building game where players start with a hand of 10 very basic cards. They are going to use the cards every turn to buy better and more powerful cards cards and then use those cards to attack the opponent and to buy even more better cards and so forth, until at the end of the game players have a big hand of much more powerful cards than they started out with. I've played this game a ton because I have the Steam version on my computer, and so I've played a fair bit on my own on the computer as well as in person with the card game. So I have a lot of experience with it. I rate the game a 6.5 out of 10. It is a good game, but it's also a very basic game from a deck building standpoint. Every turn, the choices you make are relatively obvious. You more often than not want to purchase the most expensive card that you can afford, and then you're just throwing as much attack at your opponent as you can. There's not a great deal of major decisions happening. Once you're familiar with the game, you're likely to follow a relatively similar strategy each time you play it in terms of the cards you're trying to get and how things are playing out. But it is a good game. I just feel like it could use a little bit more to flesh it out a bit, to add a little more meat to this game. I know there are a bunch of expansions available, and I'm not sure if they improved the game or not because I haven't tried any of them. I also know that there is a sort of second edition that was called Hero Realms that was done in, I think it was a medieval setting, that switches it up a bit. Oh, and there's also another one called Cthulhu Realms, I believe, that it played as an app on my phone now that I think about it some years back, and that was pretty decent too. So there are some other versions of the game out there that might be better than the basic Star Realms. Now the final game to talk about for January was a game I played with my mother and my 2 kids called In a Pickle. Now this activity is a card game where players have a hand of cards that list a number of different objects, everything from a parking lot to, I don't know, the city of Chicago, to the universe, and you're supposed to play out your cards onto stacks of other cards such that you are laying down a card that is bigger than the previous card played in the stack. It's all about comparing the size of the item on your card versus the items on the cards on the table, which sounds obviously super basic, but the twist that's supposed to be fun here is that the cards also contain these abstract concepts like love and danger, and so you're supposed to have these discussions with other players like, is love bigger than the universe? Or is danger bigger than cement? And it's supposed to trigger these discussions and debates and whatnot, and I just could not care enough to argue with another player who wants to say that danger is bigger than cement. Whatever. I just could not care less. And my goodness, what a waste of cardstock this game was. But you know, I got to sit around a table with my mom and kids and do an activity together, so hey, because of that, I'll give it a 1 out of 10. Of course, there are a million other games out there that I would recommend ahead of In a Pickle. So on that uplifting note, I'll wrap up my January games played. Have you been playing any games? Please do let me know what you've been playing, what you've been especially enjoying lately. I would love to hear about it. Thank you so much for watching. Hey, it's Josh. Thank you so much for watching my video. If you could consider doing one of the following things, I would appreciate it. Give me a thumb up, subscribe to my channel. If you've already subscribed, hit that notification bell, or share the link to the video with somebody who you think would enjoy it. Hi, I'm Josh, and I'm so grateful that you have given me some of your time to watch, which covers just as an amicable it is a game where it is so hard to read. It really is a very good who are battling this. I don't want that onto stacks